Welcome to the College Football Power Hour on a college football playoff week. It's here.
Let's
Finally,
go.
Christmas is coming early. We've been talking about this freaking playoff for years and years about an expanded playoff, and finally, we are just a few days away. He's Adam Breneman. I am Caroline Fenton. No Jason Fitz today, but he will rejoin the party for our immediate Indiana Notre Dame reaction on Friday night, and that is exactly where we start. Adam, this is the first home Notre Dame game not on NBC since like the 1980s.
Yep.
Which is wild. Gonna be a little bit weird seeing like a Notre Dame logo at home, not on NBC. And obviously the first ever Notre Dame playoff game at home at Notre Dame Stadium. Indiana comes to town. I feel like, I'm at home for the holidays. Everybody wants to talk about the playoffs.
Mm-hmm.
The vibe that I'm getting is that everyone is writing off Indiana. Everyone is looking at Indiana like, they're going to get their butts whooped. That's going to be an absolute walloping by Notre Dame. And look, it could be. I very much so see a possibility where that could be the case. I'm not totally convinced that that's 100% going to happen. I don't think the general public gives enough credit to what Indiana can do offensively, and especially how good Indiana's run defense can be.
Yeah, you said it perfectly. What Indiana does offensively is the reason this game won't be a blowout. It's the reason the game will be close. The best way to describe what Indiana does is, like decisive pacing, like their pace on offense, the way they use tempo and the way they do it, and they know what they want to do. There's nothing flashy about what Indiana is doing on offense, but they don't make mistakes. They make you do what they want you to do on defense by how fast they play, and then it's done with efficiency. In the way Curtis Rourke's playing, taking care of the football and driving the ball down the field, it's what's made this Indiana passing attack the best in America. I think only behind Miami in scoring this season. So, to me, Curtis Rourke, and we've talked about this before, Caroline, is really an X factor in this game. How well he plays it will determine if Indiana can win this game. Curtis Rourke playing well can neutralize the Notre Dame pass rush. We know how much Notre Dame loves to rush the passer, how they love to get after the quarterback. Their entire defense is built around pressuring opposing quarterbacks and making them uncomfortable. Curtis Rourke's a guy that's played 6 years of college football and has seen all of that and knows how to adjust to it. And whenever a defense takes risk blitzing, that opens up opportunities down the field to take shots. So I think Curtis Rourke will play well in this game. And I give that with a big but there. Notre Dame's going to win this game. Notre Dame's going to win this game because of how physical Notre Dame is in the trenches and how good Notre Dame's defense is. I saw a stat the other day. There's a lot of talk in football about the middle eight in the game. Middle eight is the final 4 minutes of the first half and the first 4 minutes of the second half. Such a critical time of the game. Kenny Dillingham, head coach of Arizona State, talks about it all the time. Like there's middle eight signs hanging up in the building about how important that time is. Notre Dame has outscored opponents at home 52-0 in the middle eight portions of their home games.
Wow.
Haven't given up a touchdown. And so the efficiency in those pivotal moments for Notre Dame, I think, will overpower Indiana's tempo. No matter how good Indiana is on offense, no matter how well they play, Notre Dame plays best in the big moments, especially at home. And then Notre Dame's defense has shown that it can adapt when things don't go well early. Al Golden will have a great scheme on how to pressure the quarterback. And while I think Indiana's tempo can cause some initial issues against Notre Dame's going to have the ability and will settle down, make those adjustments, and ultimately they have the more physical, the better defense and the better offensive and defensive lines. The reason I like Notre Dame in this game.
We have talked a lot about pressure in a lot of these first round games. The amount of pressure that Ryan Day and Ohio State are playing under against Tennessee, because they feel it. They can feel the criticism. They can feel the heat after losing to Michigan. The amount of pressure that James Franklin and Penn State are under, the pressure to win the big playoff game and to beat SMU and then to go then on the road to the Fiesta Bowl and beat Boise State. Those are the expectations. I feel like Notre Dame has been playing with an insurmountable amount of pressure ever since they lost to Northern Illinois. And look, I understand it. Notre Dame hasn't necessarily had a gauntlet of a schedule that maybe Georgia has had, or, Florida obviously has had this season. But I think that we all understood, and they obviously understood in that locker room after losing to Northern Illinois, their margin for error to get into the college football playoff was zero. They could not lose another game down the stretch to make it to the college football playoff. I think that's kind of serving or will serve Notre Dame well in the most pressure-packed situation they will be in all season long. But I think that this game isn't getting the hype that it deserves, isn't getting the level of intrigue that it deserves. Tennessee-Ohio State feels like it kind of lives in that area of the game that everyone's most excited for. And look, rightfully so.
Yeah.
It feels like that's the most evenly matched game, and that's the area of the bracket that's the most competitive. But Indiana and Notre Dame right now, we're recording this podcast on Wednesday morning. Right now, this game has the smallest spread. And it's a touchdown spread, so it's not like it's 1.5, 2 points. But it's the smallest spread, and I think it's for a reason. And it's because this game feels like strength on strength matchup twice over. Notre Dame has to run the football to win football games. They especially have to run the football to win this football game, whether it's with Jeremiah Love or what Riley Leonard can do with his legs. I mean, those two have combined for 29 touchdowns this season.
Yeah.
Notre Dame's offense runs through those two. Well, you got Indiana. That's the number one run defense in all of college football. And you could say, well, maybe that number is inflated because of the soft schedule that Indiana has played. Okay, fine. We can talk about that. We can acknowledge that. That doesn't take away the fact that they are still very good at stopping the run. And then on the other side, what Notre Dame does best is get after the quarterback. And what Indiana does best, at least offensively, is throw the football. Their offense goes through Curtis Rourke and what they do through the air. That's the number one key to me for Notre Dame. Obviously, it's running the football and being consistent with the run game. And obviously, it's what Riley Leonard can do through the air as well. And if Indiana takes the run away from Notre Dame, I think that's probably objective number one for that Indiana defense. But for Notre Dame, the number one key is get after Curtis Rourke. Affect Curtis Rourke. He dropped back 23 times against Ohio State. And I'll reference the Ohio State game just because that's probably the closest game that Indiana has played to what they'll see against Notre Dame. He dropped back 23 times. And those 23 dropbacks, he got sacked 5 times and completed 1 pass. Like, that's the difference right there. I think Notre Dame can replicate what Ohio State did, and that, I think, should be their number one objective, at least defensively, is get after Curtis Rourke. You take the pass away from them, you beat Indiana.
And you mentioned the Indiana run defense, which has been the best in the country against a schedule that hasn't been great. And you look at what happened against Ohio State. I look at that. That's really the game we can look at for Indiana on film and say, how did they play against Ohio State? Because you think about roster talent. Notre Dame is probably pretty similar to that Ohio State roster from a talent standpoint. Indiana sold out to stop the run in that Ohio State game. And they did. They pretty much stopped Ohio State's ground game, despite Ohio State winning that game. But when they stopped Ohio State's ground game, Will Howard in that game still went 22 of 26 in a lot of these mid-range, underneath passing plays that ultimately, because of the efficiency then passing the football, took away Indiana's control in the game. Ohio State was able to turn that mid-range pass game into their run game because Indiana was able to stop the run. So I think that's what will happen with Notre Dame. Is like it doesn't matter how good Indiana's run D is if Riley Leonard can still pick them apart from a pass game standpoint, and that's the risk when you sell out to stop the run like Indiana has all season long. And ultimately, Caroline, they're not going to see an offensive line in a run game as good as Notre Dame's has been all season long. So that's going to be a big factor in this game that almost neutralizes how good Indiana's run D has been all season long to me.
Notre Dame's offensive line, I don't think gets enough credit,
Yeah,
especially
agreed.
considering they lost their left tackle. Was it before the season or at the very beginning of the season?
Yeah.
I mean, the job that they've been able to do, given the injuries and given some of the defenses that they face, given how good they've been able to run the football all season long, how protected Riley Leonard has been all season long. I don't know. I don't believe they were a Joe Moore Award finalist, but that's another factor, I think, in this game is Indiana's defensive front has not seen an offensive line as good as Notre Dame's has been so far this season. I'm with you, Adam. I like Notre Dame in this game. I think it could be close. I think it could be a 3-point game, perhaps even tied, perhaps even Indiana has the lead at half. Ultimately, though, physicality, size, speed, that's going to win you football games especially in the college football playoff, and especially in as crazy of an environment as I expect it to be in South Bend, Indiana on Friday night, ultimately that's going to be enough for Notre Dame to pull away. I think that Notre Dame covers, but I do think at the end of the day, when we look at the final score, we'll tell ourselves the final score is not indicative of how competitive Indiana was, at least for a half of football.
Yeah, I'm with you. My final score prediction, Notre Dame 27, Indiana 23. I think Notre Dame's defense will contain Indiana's pacing and their tempo. I think Notre Dame's their offensive balance with Riley Leonard and what he does running the football himself and throwing the football down the field. I see this coming down to a late Riley Leonard drive that seals the victory. Either running the clock out, scoring a touchdown to win the game. It's going to be close, and I think Curtis Work will play well in this game. There'll be a lot to be proud of for Indiana, but ultimately, I think Notre Dame's a top 3 team in the country. So Notre Dame's going to win this game, in my opinion.
I'll say 31-21. I'm going to take Notre Dame to cover the 7-point spread with the garbage time touchdown, late in the fourth quarter to pull it away. Maybe it's close and maybe Notre Dame fans are clinching a little bit, and then it's a last-minute touchdown for Notre Dame fans to feel a little bit more comfortable and for Notre Dame to seal that one. Adam's like, enough of this Indiana-Notre Dame talk. Let's get to the game that actually matters. Let's get
the game of the year, Penn State SMU. What do you mean,
obviously.
noon at Beaver Stadium? Come on.
That's what I keep saying, to all of the college football fans that are like, the expanded playoff is ruining college football. And I'm like, well, without an expanded playoff, you wouldn't get Penn State SMU, the game of the year, the most important game that everyone's going to be watching, obviously. SMU in Penn State. I saw it's already snowing in State College. There's already snow on the ground, already snow on the field. So good luck to all these kids from Texas and the surrounding areas that are playing at SMU. But Penn State 8.5-point favorites. Has SMU seen a defensive player like Abdul Carter?
They haven't. Abdul Carter is one of the best in the country. I think Abdul Carter is a complete X factor in this game. And SMU's offensive line, specifically their tackles, aren't going to be able to keep up with Abdul Carter. Not going to be able to keep up with Deni Dennis-Sutton, Penn State's other edge rusher. That's what makes Abdul Carter so good, is that Deni Dennis-Sutton, who quietly is also one of the best pass rushers in the Big Ten, is on the other side of the ball, where you can't bring your running back over to chip Abdul, because then you got Deni Dennis-Sutton on the other side. So that's going to create havoc for SMU on offense, and they're going to struggle to push the ball down the field. The other thing, Caroline, you mentioned the snow. If it in a cold weather environment, you want to have a run game. That is the most important thing. There's an old saying in football, like run game travels in the cold. No matter where it is, no matter how cold it is, run game will travel with you. And Penn State's ground game is firing on all cylinders right now. 300-yard performance against Oregon, one of the best rushing defenses in the country in the Big Ten championship game. Katron Allen and Nick Singleton both playing well, have formed a really good 1-2 punch where Katron's more of the between the tackles, physical running back, falling forward, where Nick Singleton is a little bit more of the counter guy, outside zone, can hit the big play. And then Penn State has a healthy O-line right now. Tight ends are playing well. Tyler Warren's playing well. Penn State has the tools here in this game to wear down and sustain drives against SMU's defensive front. The key for Penn State, though, is that in the biggest games, in the big moments, their offense cannot play timid like they did against Ohio State this year. This needs to be the offense we saw against Oregon that comes out and fires on all cylinders and is feeling good, confident. Drew Aller taking those shots down the field, playing with some swagger and some confidence, not the Drew Aller that's afraid to make mistakes in the big game. So which version of Penn State's offense will we get? I'm not sure, but if Penn State can run the football, it's going to be a long day for SMU's defense.
That's going to be a big narrative going into this game. And if Penn State, I'm not putting it out there. I'm not predicting it's going to happen. I have to say it. If Penn State does lose this game, that will continue to be the narrative of, quote unquote, James Franklin can't win the big games. I'm saying I'm not predicting it to happen. I just have to address it. We're doing what we have to do. We're going to eat our vegetables before we eat our dessert. If they do lose this game, though,
James Franklin's a friend of the podcast.
He is a friend of the podcast, and we love James Franklin here on this podcast. But it does exist, unfortunately. We we condemn any James Franklin trash talk here on this here on this podcast, but that'll continue to be the narrative. You know it will. It's the same thing with Ryan Day, that he can't win the big one. He can't beat Michigan. But what's the statistic that James Franklin is 33-1 against teams not named Ohio State and Michigan over the last 3 years? Like the most insane statistic for a fan base to be frustrated with their head coach to have a record like that if you just throw out the Ohio State and Michigan games. My question to that is, okay, well, can James Franklin not win these high-profile, pressure-packed games? Or can he just not beat Ohio State and Michigan on a consistent basis? And I have to believe it's the latter, that it's the physicality and the talent that Ohio State and Michigan have had over the past couple of years that Penn State hasn't been able to match. SMU is a very good football team. SMU, I don't think, has gotten enough credit for how good they are, especially defensively. But SMU is not Ohio State of this year. SMU is not Michigan, the national championship team of 2023. SMU is not that caliber of team, is not as physical of a team as Ohio State and Michigan are. So I don't think that this game should have the same narrative floating around it of James Franklin can't win the big one, because maybe James Franklin just can't beat the better teams in the Big Ten.
Well, the funny thing about that James Franklin stat where everyone says he's, whatever the record is, 1 and something against Ohio State and Michigan, in most of those games, Ohio State and Michigan are like the number 3, number 4 teams in the country. Yeah. And it's like every head coach's record against the number 3 team in the country isn't good. Those stats always, I kind of laugh at. I think they're funny because, like, if you take the team out of it and you look at how James Franklin is against top 5 teams in the country, well, of course he's like 2-20. Every coach in America is when they're not coaching a top 3 team in the country. I think those stats can kind of be skewed a little bit, but Caroline, a big factor in this game that's been all over the national news media as well as Penn State, everyone covering Penn State, been the talk of the town, is Penn State's backup quarterback, Beau Pribula, leaving the team to go hit the transfer portal, which we can talk about all the reasons that the timing is jacked up in college football, and how the fact that Beau Pribula has to make that decision to leave right now so that a spot doesn't fill up. It's like having NFL free agency in the middle of the playoffs. It's ludicrous. It's absurd. I can't believe it's really a thing. I feel bad for Beau Pribula. But Beau Pribula is a big part of Penn State's offensive plan. I mean, he plays probably 20 snaps a game for Penn State on offense. So now Penn State comes into this game without what I would really call like a weapon on offense for them that they bring in short yardage situations. He's made big plays this year. There's packages, a bunch where Penn State has Drew Aller and Beau Pribula in the game playing offense together. That also opens up things for Tyler Warren, who also plays that kind of gadget position where they move all over the field. So now they lose that weapon on offense, but you also now approach the college football playoff, probably the most physical football games you're going to play as a team without your backup quarterback. And Penn State's backup now is Ethan Grunkmeyer, who's a freshman who hasn't played any football. So Penn State losing Beau Pribula is a big deal. And I feel bad for Beau Pribula. I feel bad for Penn State about it, but at the end of the day, I mean, Beau Pribula is a guy that grew up in York County, Pennsylvania, dreamed of going to Penn State, dreamed of playing in these playoff games, but Drew Aller announced he's coming back for his next year, so Beau has to transfer. The fact he can't finish the playoff with Penn State's frustrating, and I think I saw Coach Franklin's press conference. It's also tough for the team because they're now losing their backup quarterback in the most important game, the most important stretch of games in probably Penn State football history.
You're losing your depth at the most important position in all of football in the most critical point in the season. And you're losing your X factor in those goal line and short yardage situations. Like, you look at Beau Pribula, obviously when you look at some backup quarterbacks that are entering the transfer portal, it's like he's got an action against, Nowheresville State University, and that's really it. And he's looking for an opportunity to go start somewhere else. Well, Beau Pribula has seen a decent bit of game action. And correct me if I'm wrong, but James Franklin did come out and say that they did tell him that if he wants to finish out the playoffs and stay with the team until Penn State obviously wins the national championship, he can do that he was invited to do so. So why do you think that he decided to step away before playoff action even starts?
I think in theory that sounds like a great thing. Oh, why doesn't he just enter the portal and stay with the team through the playoff.
Yeah.
In theory, that sounds great, but logistically, how does it actually work? So now you have a backup quarterback who needs to prepare like he's a starting quarterback in case your starter goes down, who's taking visits to other schools, whose mind is clearly not in the game, thinking about where he's going to go. And also, Beau Pribula will have to make a decision very quickly of where he's going to transfer to. Mm-hmm. I mean, the way the semester works at all these schools, the academic semesters, which people forget, like players still have to think about that. Where can they get into school in time before the semester starts so they can go enroll?
I forget about that. It's like, it's crazy. Go to classes. And
also, teams take one quarterback. So like there aren't many spots that, I saw Beau Pribula, I just saw his Instagram story. He was at Missouri yesterday on a visit. So like all those things, I think it sounds really good in theory. Like, oh, he's a Penn State guy. He doesn't, keep him on the team. But like, also, what's the message that sends to the rest of your team when your backup quarterback who may have to play is taking visits and trying to prepare for the game? I just think it's tough. It's tough to do both. And I think what happened, I saw Coach Franklin said this. Beau Pribula went to practice. I think it was Monday, and that was the plan. That was to have Beau in the portal practicing for the game, preparing like to be the backup. And I guess after practice, and this is just kind of. No sources have told me this is just kind of what I'm putting two and two together because then the next day they announce he's leaving the team. Yeah. My guess is that practice probably didn't go great. Beau was kind of distracted. Coach Franklin's like, all right, we're not doing this. We love you, but you can't be on the team if you're going to be in the portal taking official visits to other schools. So it's tough. It's tough from a timing standpoint, and I do think it'll make an impact on Penn State. I think about a guy like Tyler Warren, who a lot of the times he's used in those explosive shot plays. You think about the play against USC where they put him at center and he ran the go route,
that
like some of these trick plays. A lot of it is with Beau Pribula on the field as kind of a distraction and a decoy. So it'll make an impact. It'll be interesting to see how Penn State handles it. And in the short yardage situations, Penn State likes to go to the quarterback run game with Beau Pribula. Now they'll probably use Tyler Warren in that, but he may take a couple more shots now because of Pribula being out.
Moral of the story is the college football calendar this time of year absolutely sucks. Right. It has to change, and I don't know how you change it because you're obviously working with the playoff that's set in a certain time in the calendar. You're working with bowl games, and you're working with semesters of kids that are actually going to school. It doesn't make sense for coaches that are preparing for bowl games and college football playoff games. They're preparing for, the transfer portal players coming in. They're recruiting players in the transfer portal. They're recruiting their own roster to maintain their players. National Signing Day was 2 weeks ago, and you're continuing to recruit through high school. That's unsustainable for the coaches, and it's not a good model for the players either to have to choose between, do I stay with my team and stick it out through the playoffs, or do I go pursue a future somewhere else? It doesn't make any sense whatsoever.
Yeah, it's tough. Well, hopefully they change it. I think from the chatter I've been hearing, I think it's going to change this offseason, but we'll see how the calendar ends up. Caroline, I want to give you one, and our listeners, one thing to watch in this Penn State SMU game, obviously following this Penn State team closely and watching some of the SMU film. SMU's defensive line plays extremely aggressive. You kind of have two categories of defensive line, and I'll add linebackers into that. Ones who really play like sound gap discipline. Think of like a Notre Dame defensive line against the run, or ones that really love to run up the field. They're aggressive. They thrive on penetration and attacking upfield. What happens is if they run too far afield, they can allow explosive plays behind them, but they're good at getting after the quarterback. SMU's is aggressive. They run up the field. And Penn State's favorite run is counter. And on counter, instead of a zone play is where all the linemen just no one's pulling. Everyone blocks their zone, man-to-man blocking. Where on counter, you're now pulling guards, you're pulling your tackles around at times, you're pulling a tight end around. And those counter plays where you pull the guards and tight ends create misdirection and directly challenge aggressive defensive linemen. Because what happens is those defensive linemen run upfield, they get kicked out easy, and then you have a pulling guard on the second level linebackers with no defensive line in sight. So the fact that SMU thrives on kind of disrupting those plays in the backfield, they're one of the top teams in the country in tackles for loss. I think that aggressiveness could leave them vulnerable to Penn State's counter run game. So watch that Penn State run game. If they're running the counter plays, pulling those guards, is the defensive line running upfield and almost taking themselves out of those plays. And I think it'll cause SMU to either to adjust some things and probably be a little more patient or a little more or hesitate a little bit more when they're facing a run game like Penn State's.
Yeah, no, it's a fantastic point. In this one, 8.5 point. Penn State's an 8.5 point favorite.
Yeah.
I'm taking Penn State to win this one. I'm taking Penn State to cover. And look, I'm on record saying that I didn't think SMU belonged in the playoff to begin with, but here they are in the playoff. I think Penn State, it's the same reason why I'm taking Notre Dame to beat Indiana and why I'm taking Notre Dame to cover. Penn State's physicality. Do I think that Penn State's lack of weapons around the perimeter are going to hurt them at some point in the playoffs? Yes, I do. When? I don't know. I don't think, though, that SMU's defense, as good as it has been, top 25 in several different categories throughout the season, as good as SMU's defense has been, I don't think that SMU's defense is as physical enough for Penn State's lack of deep passing weapons to be able to come to fruition in this one. I think it's a run the football kind of game with Nick Singleton and Katron Allen. It's Tyler Warren, and that him being Drew Allar's go-to guy. It's Abdul Carter and the Penn State's entire defensive front being aggressive and taking Brashard Smith and Kevin Jennings' legs away from them. And I don't think that Penn State is going to have to, show that vulnerability on the outside. So I'm going to take Penn State to win and Penn State to cover.
Do we get a score prediction though?
Score prediction. I think this one could.
You're just going win and cover.
I think this one could be pretty low scoring. I would take Penn State to win this one. I'll say 27-14.
I like it. Okay. I'm going, my prediction is Penn State 31, SMU 20. Penn State's balanced offense. We're both taking kind of a
blowout? Double-digit win?
11 points. Yeah, double-digit win in the first round of the playoffs. Will not be good for the SMU deserve to be in the playoff fan base. But Penn State's balanced offense, their dominance on line of scrimmage, as you just said, their ability also, like home field advantage, the ability to capitalize on that home field advantage in this one, I think is going to be too much for SMU. Listen, I think SMU keeps this close early. I think it's a game at halftime. I think there's a lot of, it's back and forth, but ultimately Penn State's depth, their efficiency in all three phases of the game is going to be too much for SMU to keep up in the second half.
Quick break here. We'll head to Austin. Clemson, Texas preview coming up after a quick break. Cade Klubnik heads back to Austin. Little hometown revenge game for Cade Klubnik and the Clemson Tigers. Texas 11.5 point favorites. Adam, I think that this is a nightmare matchup for Clemson. An absolute nightmare. Clemson, I have grown to always expect elite defenses from Clemson. When they were winning national championships in 2016, 2018, that whole stretch from like 2015 to 2020 when Clemson was consistently in the college football playoff and won 2 national championships, obviously it was because of elite quarterback play and also how good they were defensively. Clemson this year is not the Clemson defense that we've grown accustomed to. And Texas's offense, obviously we've seen they're mistake prone. They turn the ball over. Quinn Ewers will throw interceptions. The running backs fumble the football. They're not as explosive as we would expect a Steve Sarkisian coached Texas team to be. So I don't think that Clemson's defense, one, is good enough to take advantage of some of the mistakes that Texas's offense might make. And two, I don't think that Clemson's offense is good enough to overcome how good Texas's defense is. Clemson will win and lose games by the explosive plays. But that's the bread and butter on this offense. And you might say, duh, obviously. Like, obviously any team is going to be great if they are able to produce enough explosive plays. Texas's defense is the best in the country at limiting explosive plays. So it's kind of Clemson weakness on Texas strength. And Texas' strength on Clemson's not as much of his strength. So I think this is a nightmare matchup for Clemson. Am I wrong in thinking that?
No, I'm with you. When I was thinking about this game, I kept thinking Clemson's going to have to find a way to run the football to help Cade Klubnik. You look at some of the numbers. I mean, Clemson, I think it's like 7-0 or 8-0 this season when averaging 5 yards or more a carry. That's kind of the best stat I like to look at. More than total yards, I like to look at yards per carry, just because you can be skewed if you run the ball 40 times that you run it for, it looks like you played really well, but you averaged for 3 yards a pop. It wasn't that good. When Clemson's averaging 5 yards a carry, they're 7 or 8 now. Texas has not once this season allowed 5 yards a carry in a game. Texas plays defense like they got 13, 14 guys on the field. So it's going to be a long, long day for Clemson Clemson's run game, and that's going to put Cade Klubnik in really tough situations. And we've seen that not play out for Cade Klubnik a couple times. When that happens, it forces Klubnik to be razor sharp. And at times when Clemson hasn't ran the football well, Clemson's completed 55% of their passes in some of those games. So they haven't been efficient enough on offense to overcome that run game that's not very good. Ultimately, I don't think Texas has to go crazy here. Like, get Quinn Ewers into a rhythm early in this game, that short to quick to mid-range passing game. Push your offensive line to protect well, to be able to get some movement up front, run the football, and keep the chains moving. Clemson is a momentum team. They play with these like big sparks of momentum. They've played really well in the first quarter of games this year. Like they're so up and down, where if Texas can just be steady Eddie, drive after drive, play after play, don't try to do too much, don't turn the football over. You hear me say that all the time, but that's the most critical piece. Can't turn it over. I think Texas will end up dominating this game if they can just kind of wear down this Clemson defense and be able to run the football and use that quick passing game. But Quinn Ewers has to play clean football.
And that's my question as far as Texas is concerned. It's easy to trust Dabo in a college football playoff situation because we've seen him here. This Clemson team isn't those Clemson teams. And against this Texas pass defense that didn't give up a passing touchdown until Texas played Vanderbilt in mid-October, which is just wild to think about. But so it's easy to trust Clemson, but overall, I don't think that this Clemson team is good enough. My question for Texas is, what's the margin for error? Because we've seen Texas make mistakes in games but still find ways to win. We've also seen Texas make mistakes and find ways to lose in those two games against Georgia. And I'll take the SEC championship as the perfect example of that. You miss field goals, the offensive line struggled to run block, and the defense couldn't stop Georgia's run. That's it right there. Just a couple of less than perfect moments here and there, and that was enough for Texas to lose that football game. I think Georgia's a better team than Clemson. I think the margin for error against Clemson is a little bit bigger. But if Quinn Ewers turns the football over, if the running backs are also kind of reckless with the football, which we've seen them be over the past few weeks, if Bert Auburn can't make his field goals, he's been wildly inconsistent over the past couple of weeks, that's the path for Texas to lose this football game. If they just play to the style of football that they can play consistently, that's Quinn Ewers taking care of the football, that's Trey Wisner and Jaden Blue running the football, that's Quinn Ewers taking advantage of his tight end, Gunnar Helm, in some red zone situations, and that's the defense just playing absolutely lights out like they have in 11 of the 13 games that they've played this year. That's the path. But the margin for error for Texas is a big one for me.
Yeah, the key matchup in this game, one of them, there's a handful of them. One of them is Quinn Ewers against Clemson's secondary. Quinn Ewers coming off, he's had a strong season, and he's showed the ability in a bunch of big games to be able to carve up defenses when given time to throw the football, when his offensive line plays well. There's been times where he hasn't, and when he's turned the football over too much. Then you look at Clemson's secondary, another story of kind of up and down season. They have been opportunistic in the secondary, and they have had a knack for forcing turnovers back there. So Quinn Ewers' decision-making and his accuracy will be critical in this game. And as you just said, Caroline, as we said, controlling the tempo of this game and keeping ball control for Texas will be critical. Especially against a defense like Clemson's that disguises coverage and does some exotic things in the secondary. So, but it all comes back. The game always gets closer to the football. We're talking about the quarterback in the secondary, but the game always comes back to those trenches. Can Texas give Quinn Ewers the ability to stand in the pocket with clean vision, no one in his face, and drive the football down the field to guys like Matt Golden? Can he do that? And can the offensive line give him that time? It is all about those trenches, because a lot of times when turnovers happen is when there's pressure in a quarterback's face. So ultimately, I think Quinn Ewers will win that battle against the Clemson secondary, and that's why I have Texas winning this game 34-27. I think it's closer than maybe you think it's going to be. But I do think that it'll be a game that we look at and say, man, Texas really dominated a lot of parts of that game. Listen, Cade Klubnik will make some plays. He'll extend some plays with his legs, make some things happen. But ultimately, Texas's offensive explosiveness, their balance, the defensive line, the run defense. And then Texas has been really good in the red zone this season, which is such a critical stat in these games. I think that'll be too much for Clemson.
Another factor here, Texas gets their left tackle back. Kelvin Banks, who's going to be the first, if not the first, the second offensive lineman taken off the board in the NFL draft in April. He's been on the list of so many awards in the college football playoff awards over the past couple of weeks. He was out in the SEC championship game. I want to say it was a shoulder or an ankle or whatever it was. Doesn't matter. He was out in the SEC championship game, and you saw that really hurt Texas. They really struggled to run the football. You saw Quinn Ewers get a little bit shaken up at times. Everything that I have heard is that he should be back for this game. So a huge upgrade there on the offensive line.
We not to cut you off, we recruited Kelvin Banks at Arizona State when I was there, and I had this like vivid memory of Antonio Pierce, who's now the head coach of the Raiders. He was the recruiting coordinator at Arizona State, of turning on Kelvin Banks' high school film. And Antonio Pierce was in his office, and like I remember AP like shouting down the hallway, like yelling at the coaches, like "AB, come in here!" And then like Zach Hill was their offensive coordinator. He's like, "Zach, get in here!" And I'm like, "What is going on?" Because AP wasn't a man that like talked didn't scream very much. And we run into his office, and he's like, "This is the best offensive lineman I've ever seen." We got him on the phone. We offered him a scholarship, and very quickly we realized we had no chance of getting him to Arizona State. So when you say Kelvin Banks, I always remember, man, how good that dude was coming out of high school.
He's ridiculous. And he's one of those that, there's a lot of players that are super highly touted 5 stars coming out of high school. And then you're like, oh yeah, what happened to that guy? It doesn't really come to fruition at the college level. No. Kelvin Banks might be just as good, if not better, than advertised when he was coming out of high school. But Kelvin Banks could have had a first-round bye had you gone to Arizona State.
No doubt. Yeah, wrong choice it turned out. Wow.
Wrong choice, Kelvin Banks.
How the tables turn, huh?
Funny how that works, isn't it? 11.5 points is a really big spread in a playoff setting. And I know that Clemson has had their warts so far this season. And I know that the only reason why Clemson is in the playoff to begin with is a lot of things going right for them around them. 11.5 is just a lot. I think that this could be a much closer game than we anticipate. I don't think it's going to be overly high scoring. There's going to be a lot of points scored. I think, frankly, this could be like a 27-21 kind of game. That Texas eventually pulls away, and Texas and how talented they are ultimately is what propels them to take on who would they play in the second round? Arizona State.
Yeah, ACU. Yep.
Nice little Kelvin Banks showdown there.
Yep.
Yeah, the only 2 teams that I'm sure offered Kelvin Banks a scholarship out of high school. Texas and Arizona State. And like every other team in America. All right, moving on to the final game of the first round of the college football playoffs. Tennessee at Ohio State. Have you heard of the whole ticket situation as this game is concerned? Apparently, so if you're not familiar with Vols fans, and I can say this because I live in Tennessee, my parents went to Tennessee, my boyfriend went to Tennessee, everyone in my life went to Tennessee. I'm the black sheep of the family for not going to the University of Tennessee. They're crazy. Like, they are absolutely insane. Nobody loves their university and their football team more than University of Tennessee fans love the Vols. So there was some Tennessee fan that found the Ohio State season ticket holder code for early access to these tickets. So Tennessee fans went in and bought like a ton of Ohio State season ticket holder tickets, like on like Ticketmaster, StubHub, all of the ticket, things. And I saw something that had like 45% of the tickets sold for this game came from a Tennessee address. So I'm not going to be surprised if it's not going to be 50-50. Obviously, there's going to be way more Ohio State fans in that stadium. I wouldn't be surprised, though, if it was close to 50-50 because Tennessee fans are coming in droves. I also saw something on Twitter that this Tennessee fan, do you know what Touch Tunes is?
No.
It's like a jukebox, like a digital electronic jukebox.
Oh,
that you
at
can
the bars?
Pay. Yeah, like at bars, at restaurants.
Yeah.
You can pay to play like whatever song you want. This Tennessee fan paid to play Rocky Top in every single Waffle House within like a 25-mile radius at Ohio State's campus. So like that's what we're working with here with some of these two fan bases.
Are Tennessee fans just nuts? Like just insanely crazy?
Adam, they're insane. And I say that lovingly. I say that with a whole lot of love in my heart for Tennessee fans, but they're insane.
That's one of my biggest regrets was never taking an official visit to Tennessee. And I was debating it. I should have. I made a mistake there. I made a big mistake.
You would have gotten, all this was, I guess, pre-Twitter what it is today, but you would have gotten all the DMs and all the Tennessee fan tweets because they go hard. They're passionate.
Maybe I would have gotten like cash in a McDonald's bag and all that stuff that was going on there.
Yeah. You can, you can only hope. You can only hope. But Tennessee, Ohio State is a 7-point favorite in this one. This game, to me, feels like the most Big Ten matchup of them all.
No doubt.
Because what it comes down to is who can run the football the best and who stops the run the best.
Yeah. I'm torn on this game. I've talked about how Ohio State is one of my contenders to win the national title, despite that loss to Michigan. But then I think about this how this matchup plays out with Tennessee, and I'm torn for a lot of reasons. I think if this game was on a neutral field, I think I might side with Tennessee. However, this game is played in the Horseshoe at night in front of a rabid fan base, maybe a couple extra Tennessee fans, as you just explained. But this is a fan base and a team that does not have a good taste in its mouth after that last home game they had. So, listen, I see this playing out back and forth with Ohio State taking a lead late in the fourth quarter and holding on to advance to the Rose Bowl and having a rematch with Oregon in a game that I think they'll be favored in that one. So there's a few things for why I think Ohio State wins. One, Ohio State's defensive front against Tennessee's run game. I favor Ohio State's defense in this one. Top 5 defense nationally in rushing yards allowed per game or per carry at under 3 yards a carry, which is, we just talked about that. Holding teams under 3 yards a carry changes the entire game. Jack Sawyer, some of these guys on the Ohio State defensive line, I think will disrupt Dylan Sampson and the Tennessee run game. Ohio State's passing game. I think Chip Kelly's going to learn his lesson. Ohio State tried to get into a physical running the football battle with Michigan and ignored their star receivers for most of that game. That's not going to happen again. Great coaches learn from their mistakes. I still think Chip Kelly and Ryan Day are great coaches. So Jeremiah Smith, Emeka Egbuka, Carnell Tate, I would hammer their overs on their player props. I think they will have huge days against a Tennessee secondary that has been up and down. And if Will Howard gets some time, I think Ohio State will exploit those mismatches, and Ohio State's passing game will have a good day. And then the third piece, as I mentioned, is just the home field advantage. I think that's critical in these close matchups. It's going to be cold, frigid conditions, passionate crowd. All those three things give Ohio State the edge in this one. I think Ohio State wins 27-21. I don't think it's a super high-scoring game, but I think Ohio State pulls away late in the fourth quarter.
The matchup that is going to dominate this conversation, and rightfully so, it's not wrong in the slightest, is going to be Ohio State's defensive line against Dylan Sampson. Dylan Sampson is the SEC Player of the Year. He is run for over 100 yards in all but 2 games this season. And the 2 games that he didn't run for 100 yards is because he got pulled early in those games because Tennessee was up by so much. He's found the end zone in all but 1 game this season. That game against Vanderbilt, he didn't score a touchdown. So Dylan Sampson is the Tennessee offense. We talk a lot about Nico Iamaleava, and look, rightfully so, he has gotten better week over week and game over game so far this season. But this offense is Dylan Sampson. I think how Ohio State wins this game, though, is exactly what you said, is the passing game. Is Tennessee's, I would say, their one weakness on their team, because they're really good up front defensively. They're really good running the football. They can throw the football, obviously, it's a Josh Heupel offense. Their one, quote-unquote, weakness is an inexperienced secondary. They lost a ton of players this past season to the transfer portal. They haven't really been exposed to a whole lot in the secondary. And that's exactly how Ohio State wins this football game. Emeka Egbuka, Carnell Tate, Jeremiah Smith, and Will Howard distributing the football. My only question, though, is, can Ohio State's offensive line hold up enough to give Will Howard time to distribute the football to those 3 guys? Obviously, they're without their left tackle. They're without their starting center, Seth McLaughlin, who just won the Remington Award for the best center in all of college football. So can Ohio State's offensive line hold up? It didn't against Michigan. Ohio State has to have a different game plan against Tennessee than they had against Michigan. That's the X factor in this one for me. The Ohio State offensive line against what I think is probably the deepest defensive line in all of college football in Tennessee.
Ohio State having the injuries on offensive line when they did is actually a blessing. Not that they had the injuries, but the timing of it, the fact that it happened where it did in the season and not in the first round of the playoffs, not in the second round of the playoffs, is huge. The offensive line takes some time to piece together after injuries, and the fact that it happened, they didn't play well. Chip Kelly, Ryan Day got to see what it looks like, how they can adjust it. I think will be less of an issue now moving forward than it was in that Michigan game, than it was at earlier points in the season. But there's no doubt that Ohio State has, since losing McLaughlin, since losing some of those guys, has struggled. So that's where, for me, another kind of game within the game for this one. Whenever you have an offensive line that's either inexperienced or banged up, a lot of times teams go to that perimeter run game and perimeter passing game. And Ohio State loves the jet sweep and the motion concepts with their star receivers to pull defenders out of the box and to get the ball on the edge and to use kind of those, I call them gadget plays, like the jet sweeps, the pitches, the screen plays, as other ways to quote-unquote run the football. And I think that pre-snap motion, the jet sweeps, will create some hesitation in Tennessee's aggressive defensive line and allow their offensive line to play with a little bit of an advantage in some of these situations. So if Ohio State can use motion and shift and those jet sweeps to manipulate Tennessee a little bit and manipulate Tennessee's gap integrity and timing, I think Ohio State will be able to run the football, be able to give Will Howard time. But it's all going to come down to that for Ohio State's offense, because they will win the battle on the perimeter. They will have the better. Ohio State has better talent. They will win one-on-one. Does Will Howard have time? And does Tennessee's aggressiveness throw off some of that balance for Ohio State's offense?
I think Tennessee's going to win this game.
Really?
I do.
Wow.
We've picked all favorites so far in the playoffs. Yeah. And if we've learned anything in college football this year, the favorites aren't always going to win. And I look at this Tennessee-Ohio State matchup, and I think this is the perfect matchup for Tennessee. And I know I just said that Ohio State's game plan cannot be the same as what they did against Michigan, but if you look at how Michigan beat Ohio State, it's exactly the formula for how Tennessee wants to win football games, but Tennessee does it better. Michigan took the run away from Ohio State. Well, Tennessee can do that really well with that defensive front. Michigan just hammered the ball and ran the ball down Ohio State's throats for about 4 yards a crack, just continued and consistently ran the football. Tennessee can do that better than any other team really in the country. So that's the formula, I think, for Tennessee. I'm watching that Michigan game and saying, copy, paste, that's how I can beat Ohio State. So I think Tennessee is able to win this one. Low scoring, probably very, very close, potentially on a walk-off field goal, 24-21, Tennessee advances. Ryan Day gets fired. Mike Vrabel is the next head coach of the Ohio State Buckeyes. Book it. Send it in. That's what it is. Vrabes. Okay. Vrabes is now in cahoots and talks of being the next head coach in Chicago. No. Vrabel's going to go back home, and he's going to be the one to get Ohio State to a national championship.
I like it. That's a good prediction. It's a good prediction. I struggled with picking all four favorites, but ultimately, you gotta stand on the hill. I gotta die on the hill. I'm saying Ohio State's my contender to win the whole thing, so I gotta ride with it. I think they beat Tennessee, but there's no shot all four favorites win, which is what's giving me hesitation. It's just giving me too, and the spreads are too big. They're all touchdown spreads. I'm like, there's no shot they all just win.
There's no way.
All I need, just don't let it be Penn State, the one that screws me here.
That's the one though, and I'm not just blowing smoke. That's the one that I feel most confident in.
That one would be shocking if it happens. It's inexcusable.
What would the Penn State fan base do /say/ how would they react if that did happen?
It certainly wouldn't be good. James Franklin wouldn't go anywhere. I don't think he'd even be on the hot seat at that point, but it wouldn't be good. I think it'd be a hard, long look in the mirror about how Penn State plays in these big games, and Coach Franklin would have to adjust something. There's no way, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. So I see it. I don't see any way that Penn State comes out and doesn't play well in this game. I think they've had time to rest. It's been 2 weeks and they match up really well with SMU, but it would not be good. And then listen, Caroline, they beat SMU. They then go play Boise State. It ain't going to be good if they lose to Boise either.
No.
So you got to win too. You got to get to the semifinals if you're Penn State.
Do you agree with me? If Ohio State loses this game, is Ryan Day gone?
Yeah. Oh yeah. I've been saying semifinals for Ohio State. You got to win two.
And I even put that out there whenever I tweeted this after Ohio State lost to Michigan. And I said, if Ohio State doesn't at least get to the national championship, he's going to completely lose this fan base. And I had so many Ohio State fans say, like, no, we need to win a national championship. Just getting there isn't enough. And I know the fan base and the athletic department are two very different things, but still.
Well, and it just all comes down to Ohio State has the most talented roster in America. And as a coach, your job is to get your players to play up to their talent level. And Ohio State hasn't done it. So, listen, I still think that they make a run. I think Ohio State's got a real chance to win the national title. But, yeah, for Ryan Day, I think you just said national championship. I think he's got to make the semifinals to keep his job.
Well, let's some prop bets and a new name and a new face in the college football coaching world. We'll hit that coming up next. Let's hit some prop bets. Crash out or cash out. Crash out, bad bet. Cash out, great bet. We'll start with Tyler Warren in this Penn State SMU matchup. We were just kind of talking in the Adam Breneman and Caroline Fenton Sportsbook. We would have set the over-under, at least I would have set the over-under at Tyler Warren over 100 receiving yards. Clearly, Vegas thinks I'm a little cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. The actual that we've seen on some sports books, the actual Tyler Warren over-under receiving yards is set at 70.5. Right, wrong, over, under, your thoughts?
I would go over 100 if we were going rushing and receiving yards, because Tyler Warren's good for about 10 to 20 rushing yards as well a game. So total yards, I'd take Tyler Warren over that. I think he goes over on the receiving yards total of 72. Would you say 72 and a half or something?
70 and a half.
70 and a half. I would take, if it's 70, hammer that over. I mean, I listen. Especially with no Beau Pribula for Penn State's offense, they're going to rely even more on their best playmaker. Warren is versatile. He'll be used in short yardage game, intermediate passing game, and Tyler Warren is good for a couple big shots down the field, especially against an aggressive SMU defense. There will be some plays there for Tyler Warren to make. Drew Aller was slinging that thing against Oregon. I mean, he was driving it down the field. So I like Tyler Warren to have a big game. I would take either one of those, but over 100 rushing and receiving. If we can find that anywhere, anyone get that. If that's the line, maybe you can juice the line a little bit, get some better odds. I would hammer 100 plus for Tyler Warren.
Well, just looking at his last 5 games, and all but one, he's had more than 70 receiving yards, and it's been by a wide margin. 84 against Oregon in the Big Ten title game. He had 68 against Maryland, but 102 against Minnesota, 127 against Purdue, 75 against Washington. I love that. Over 70 and a half receiving yards for Tyler Warren. If it's under, let's say Tyler Warren has a 65-yard receiving day. What does that mean for Penn State?
Yeah, I don't think it's as dramatic as some might think. I do think there's a path in this game for how Penn State wins by running the football really well and doesn't have to lean on Tyler Warren. I think, listen, if Tyler Warren doesn't have 4 or 5 catches, at least 5, 6 targets total or touches total, including running the football, I think that's a bad sign. Like, that means that your coordinator didn't get your best players the ball. What those plays end up being, I think there's multiple paths for Penn State to win. And Tyler Warren having 50 yards receiving, there's still a path for how Penn State wins that game. But history repeats itself, and Tyler Warren in their big games plays really well, and they force feed him the football. And especially against, Penn State struggled at wide receiver. And I think that, Penn State's not going to have a wide receiver matchup where they say, man, this guy will dominate SMU secondary 101. The only guy that will is Tyler Warren. So I really like his totals to go over here. But I also think that if he's under, it doesn't mean Penn State lost the game. It means we lost our bet.
And, that might be just as tragic.
Yeah, that's more tragic.
It's right up there with Penn State losing the game. All right, Texas-Clemson matchup. Arch Manning anytime touchdown. This is one of my favorite prop bets in every single Texas game. But on the Adam Breneman Sportsbook, Arch Manning anytime touchdown, what would have minus odds? Yes or no?
Minus odds would have no. And I'm guessing that's what it is on the regular sport.
More likely no than yes?
Yeah, I think it's a good bet. I mean, Texas has shown that they will use Arch Manning in these situational packages, especially in a big game like this. And listen, Arch Manning's probably the quarterback of the future at Texas. Why not get your guys some touches in those situations near the goal line in a high-pressure playoff game? And then, I think Texas, when you're playing a run defense like Clemson's with how they play up front, that sometimes using these creative looks can help. So I would expect Texas to go to Arch Manning in this game and let him run the football some. It's going to determine the factor will be where it is on the field. Is it on the goal line? We saw that in the SEC championship game. So I like it though. I would take that bet.
I would say Arch Manning touchdown, yes, for a couple of reasons. One, because we've seen Texas do that, and two, because I don't ever want to be in a situation where Arch Manning comes out on the field and I say, no, go back, no. Same thing why I always like to take overs, because I never want to be upset about scoring touchdowns. But I also believe, too, if Texas wins a national championship, number one, a reason will be because of their defense. But I don't think that Texas can win a national championship with Arch Manning not playing at least some role in it. Whether it's Arch Manning coming in for certain packages or whether that's Arch Manning coming in for a half, whatever that might be, Arch Manning will be at least part of the fabric of a Texas national championship if they do, in fact, go on to win the Natty.
BetMGM has Arch Manning anytime touchdown at plus 185. I was close at plus 200.
Okay.
So plus odds on anytime. First touchdown score, get it for plus 1,200. 2 touchdowns for Arch Manning, get it for 1,400, plus 1,400 odds. So I would stay away from any of those, but I like anytime touchdown at plus 185. I think that's pretty good odds.
First touchdown score is a little bit too rich for my blood because Arch Manning always comes in like late game situations. It's like we've exhausted everything. Now here's our young little dynamo. But hey, plus 1,200, who knows? Make yourself some money. Go crazy. Tennessee-Ohio State matchup. Dylan Sampson over-under rushing total set at 93.5. Adam, I'm hammering that over because Dylan Sampson is averaging 125 rushing yards per game. So you're telling me that I can get plus odds at under 100 yards? Easy money to me, even against an Ohio State defense that I think probably will sell out to stop the run.
I'm going under. I think
under.
Ohio State's defensive front is elite, giving up 2.8 yards a carry this season. I get that Sampson's a talented back, but Ohio State's ability to contain the run game, force Tennessee into passing situations, which I think they'll be in a bunch, will limit ultimately Dylan Sampson's total yardage in this game. So I'm going to go under on that. Is it? What would you say it said at
93.5?
93.5. Yeah. I mean, I think Sampson's at 85 yards in this game running the football. And that's not rushing and receiving. That's just rushing yards. I'm going under on that. I think Ohio State's defensive front dominates this game and dominates the trenches.
I think Dylan Sampson will at least get to triple digits. Like, I think he'll be at the 100-yard mark. But I like your point about Tyler Warren. I don't think that necessarily means that if Dylan Sampson hits that 100-yard mark, that Tennessee's absolutely positively going to win the football game. I think that's just what we can come to expect from Dylan Sampson. He ran for over 100 against Georgia. Tennessee obviously lost that game. He ran for 140 against Arkansas on the road. Tennessee lost that game. So it's not necessarily an indicator of a win or a loss for Tennessee, but he is going to get enough touches. They are going to run him. They do not mind giving Dylan Sampson the ball 25, 27, 30 times a game. So just with that amount of usage, I feel like close to 100 is inevitable. But it doesn't necessarily mean anything for the outcome. Not anything. Doesn't mean a ton to me in terms of the outcome of the game.
25 carries for Dylan Sampson, averaging 3 yards a carry, still only 75 yards. So we'll see. It's going to come down to how good Ohio State's D-line plays. And if he can average 4 yards a carry, then he's hit it. He's hit the over.
He's averaging 6 yards a carry on the season. So you marry that with Ohio State's 3 yards a carry
It's
that
at
they're
4.
allowing. So 4 times 25, that's 100.
You got it. Yep.
We're rich. We're rich. We won. Those are just a few that we're looking at here. But to step out of the college football playoff bubble for a second, so a lot of news in college football. Obviously, it's transfer portal season, obviously recruiting season, a lot of coaching carousel. A little news that came out earlier this week, Michael Vick announced that he will be the next head coach at Norfolk State. It seems to me, football is a copycat sport. We see it a lot in the NFL. College football now, the more and more it resembles the NFL, the more and more it also is becoming a copycat sport. You look at what Deion Sanders was able to do at Colorado. In 2 years, he turned Colorado from a 1-win football team to a 9-win football team with a Heisman Trophy winner. We're looking at North Carolina, bringing in Bill Belichick. Frankly, I don't think it's going to work, but prove me wrong, Bill. It looks like Norfolk State is kind of following that same model of a big name, a recognizable name, a guy that's found a whole lot of success, whether as a player or in UNC's case, as a coach at the next level. Adam, will Michael Vick be successful as a head coach, whether it's at Norfolk State, and will we eventually see him in a larger role at a larger Power 4 school at some point?
Yeah, Norfolk State hiring Michael Vick I think it's a genius move. College football right now is about talent acquisition. It's about building momentum. It's about recruiting. It's about recruiting your own roster, keeping players on your team. It's about momentum. It's about hype. It's about being the CEO of a program, and not as much about developing actual players on the field and their training and the X's and O's. And that's what a great coaching staff is for. Michael Vick's story of redemption and overcoming adversity will resonate deeply with high school recruits and college players. And think about how a guy like Steve Sarkisian and his story of redemption resonates with his team and with his players. I see something similar here with Michael Vick. I think his ability to inspire and connect with guys and foster trust and motivation and essentially build a winning culture at Norfolk State will be evident pretty early on. I think the other part of this is just the recruiting power a guy like Michael Vick has. When Michael Vick calls, you answer the phone. When Michael Vick wants to visit your high school, you say yes and roll out the red carpet, and everyone in the high school talks about it. When Michael Vick wants to come visit your grandmother's home for a recruiting visit, you say yes, and the whole family shows up, and everyone's asking for pictures. Vick is a legend in the football world. And then you combine that with his relatability, and it's going to make him a magnetic force in college football recruiting. The third piece of this is let's not discredit Mike Vick's football mind. He played for guys like Andy Reid, great football offensive minds that understand the game and can implement a good scheme on both sides of the ball. And Vick will be able to hire good coaches on both sides of the ball. And when you're a head coach, it's all about recruiting, and it's all about hiring good staff. He will be able to do all those things. And I think we'll see there's going to be a bunch of dual-threat quarterbacks that want to go play at Norfolk State for Mike Vick. Think about this. What we're going to see, prediction time. One of the top 10 quarterbacks in the country, dual-threat, will go to Norfolk State to play for Mike Vick, just like how Travis Hunter went to Jackson State to play for Deion Sanders. That will happen, and I think we'll see Mike Vick get a head coaching job at a power program pretty soon.
All great points. And not only is he a legend in football, he's a legend in that state.
Yeah.
I have to think that so many kids growing up in the state of Virginia and those surrounding areas idolized Michael Vick and what he brought to that Virginia Tech program. I think that Deion Sanders has now created a new blueprint. That Colorado is not an overly fertile recruiting ground. Colorado is not a destination place for some of the top talent in America, or at least it wasn't before Deion Sanders got there. How do you get premier elite talent to Colorado? Well, you bring in someone that those kids want to play for, someone that those kids probably idolize. I guess they weren't alive when Deion Sanders was playing for the most part, but it's Deion freaking Sanders and it's Mike freaking Vick that I think it's 100% the way that you open the door to, I don't want to say elite talent, because I don't know if Norfolk State will ever be a destination for elite talent. Again, prove me wrong, but it's going to be a destination, or at least now on the map for so many kids around that area, for kids, exactly like you said, dual threat quarterbacks that have the same kind of path that Michael Vick had. So you're opening the door for a new level of player and a new level of talent to come into your program. That's exactly what it is. I think it can work. I absolutely positively think that it can work because I think that college football is also trending in a way of younger head football coaches. We're seeing it with Lane Kiffin. We're seeing it with Kenny Dillingham and the success that he's had very early on at Arizona State. The players want to play for guys like that, guys that they can relate to, guys that are more on their level, guys that understand maybe a little bit more what they're going through as a 35, 40, 45-year-old coach versus a old white man. That's just exactly how it is. So I do absolutely see a path where it can work. And I love to kind of see this new trend of big time names coming into college football head coaching. I'm excited for it. Whenever you can get a guy like that into this sport, I'm here for it.
Yeah, and then maybe he has a good season or two, and then once LSU moves on from Brian Kelly, we get Mike Vick, head coach at LSU.
Hell yeah. Let's go. I mean, it bodes well that, the mascot's a cat. So, it's might be a little bit better fit there than maybe Georgia. I had to.
Come on.
I had to. I'm sorry.
That was good. That was good. That was good.
I know we're past that, but hey. On that note, that's going to do it for us today. We're going to be back on Friday night. We'll have a full and immediate reaction to Indiana and Notre Dame. And obviously, we'll be back on Saturday as well with the full reaction to the other 3 games in the first round of the college football playoff. He's Adam Breneman. You can follow him at Adam Breneman81. You can follow me at Caroline Fenton1. Always appreciate y'all for stopping by the podcast. You can like it, subscribe it, review it, rate, all of those great things. Just appreciate you for stopping by and always interacting with us. So tell a friend about the podcast. Tell people you hate about the podcast. Tell a Norfolk State fan about the podcast. Like I said, we'll be back on Friday night. We are out.